Qu'est-ce qui vous pousse à continuer, Oscar?
Pour la beauté du geste.
La beauté. On dit qu'elle est dans l'œil. Dans l'œil de celui qui regarde.
Alors si personne ne regarde plus.
Who were we when we were who we were back then?
Okay, so that should have been some of the trailer for Holy Motors. This movie is so difficult to describe that I've decided to just cut and paste from the IMDb page and see what that gets me. So here we go. From dawn to dusk, a few hours in the life of Monsieur Oscar, a shadowy character who journeys from one life to the next. He is in turn captain of industry, an assassin, a beggar, a monster, and a family man. ... It's kind of a weird movie to try and even describe, but basically you have one character performing a multitude of different parts as he's kind of wheeled around town in a limo, changing identity to identity to identity. And that's kind of the movie as a whole. I'm going to say right now, the four of us are going to kind of talk about this movie at length and explicitly. We're going to be very spoiler heavy in this one. So if you have a desire to see Holy Motors, and you want to listen to the Out Now with Aaron and Abe episode about Holy Motors, I guess see the movie first before you listen to the rest of this podcast. So, with that out of the way, I'm going to shoot to Adam first. Adam, what did you think of Holy Motors?
I love this movie. I thought it was one of the most delightful experiences I had in a movie theater all of last year. I forgive my pronunciation because I may not get these names right, but Denis Lavant is fantastic. You know, his character has to transform himself every couple of minutes, at least as far as screen time goes. And he's fantastic. I mean, there are so many great sequences, but one of my favorites is this bit where he's a hobo, and he's the strangest hobo I've ever seen. And it's great because the performance almost in some ways, I'm having a hard time describing it. It's masterful. Because literally he's fantastic in every single bit that he has to put on, and it's great because it's also a look at the nature of performance, because there's just enough of a narrative thread to kind of hold you as far as expecting it to make sense, but you get the sense that this guy is never off stage, and I could ramble incoherently, but I know we'll get into more later. I love this movie.
Mark Hoban.
All right. Well, I mean, like you described, Aaron, in the beginning, it's sort of an accumulation of like little sketches that are kind of strung together, and they tell the story of this Monsieur Oscar who travels from different meetings. And so these mini movies, they're kind of like different genres: a melodrama, a gangster flick, a musical. But I didn't really find these little mini movies particularly interesting. I was fascinated by what would happen next. So I was constantly on the edge of my seat, like, okay, what is going to happen in this little vignette? And we're sort of interested and drawn into the story at first, but then I found that each story would just kind of go nowhere, and it sort of had like the promise of something and then would kind of have this non-ending that really was sort of like disappointing. And, a lot has been talked about that this is sort of an homage to the filmmaking and an actor's life and all that. But if that's the case, then it just feels like maybe they're not enjoyed making movies, because it is a very sort of sad, sort of depressing tale. And this character that he plays throughout the film is kind of he's not the, I don't know, I didn't find him very likable. And he maybe he doesn't need to be likable, but I wasn't really captivated by him. So all in all, I was kind of left sort of I wasn't charmed by the film.
Maxwell.
Okay, I very much like the film. And one of the things, I always appreciate a work of art that doesn't have answers. I think people tend to spend too much time expecting the films they view or the books they read or the TV shows they watch to give to spoon feed it all to them and give them the answers. And part of what I really like about Holy Motors is that so much of it is open to interpretation. Because if I'm going to be completely honest, the movie is nonsense. I mean, it is a series of vignettes, but not much of it makes any sort of rational or logical sense. I say none of these things to impugn the film, though. I thought that it was sort of really magical and had this sort of like hypnotic, almost fever dream quality to it that really took me on this almost out-of-body experience where I really connected with what was going on, even if I didn't connect the dots or understand it. I went to film school, where you're faced with a lot of false pretension, and I had to take a class in experimental film, and a lot of the various vignettes in Holy Motors kind of reminded me of the work that my fellow students back in the day would produce for this class, but executed at a much more masterful level. But what also struck me is that I don't know how familiar you guys are with the life of the director, and I think it can sometimes be crude or unnecessary to delve into the personal life of the artist. But in this case, the director, Leos Carax's girlfriend or wife, I'm not sure which, I believe killed herself last year, right before he made the film. And I can really feel that pain and that sort of lingering sadness running throughout the film, and I can't help but feel that informed a lot of the decisions and the mood that it strikes.
I kind of fall in line with Mark on this one in terms of just how I kind of accepted the movie, because I feel like there's a lot to admire here, but for myself, it's just not really. It's not the kind of movie for me, and because I came into it, I was very intrigued by it, just knowing kind of what I knew and knowing the kind of regard it was getting, and even going the first few kind of vignettes in it, I was like, all right, I'm kind of with what you're throwing down here, and I was happy to stick with it throughout. But at the end of the whole kind of this whole kind of experiment, this whole kind of film, I was just kind of left with, well, I see what you did there. It's not necessarily something that I loved, but I do see where the appreciation can be, and I do really admire the lead performance here, given the kind of lengths that he's going to throughout this film and the different transformations that he's making. So it's a weird one for sure, and if I was to put it in the most blunt way possible, it almost feels like the kind of film that people that don't tend to like art house films would use as an example as to why they don't like art house films. But I don't think that's not me for sure, and that's the art house quality of it is not something that I'm necessarily saying is a bad thing or anything. It's just more of it's not suitable for my own taste in movies, if that makes any sense. Because I'm trying to be perfectly fair to it, because it's certainly not a movie I hated, just not one that I'm the person that was going to appreciate this movie.
I think Maxwell really hit it on the head when he said that it's not about this particular one. And again, obviously, everybody's taste is different, so that's not to say that somebody who doesn't like the film is wrong or whatnot. But I think he hit it on the head when he said that the movie's really not about finding answers so much as it's sort of, like I said, there's a sense of discovery in the film. You go through the film, I don't know if it was like me, I was really curious to see what he would become next. Because I'd seen the trailer and I'd seen a bunch of different bits and pieces of the film. But there's the bit where he is doing the motion capture work. And that's hilarious and fascinating. And then he's the father taking the daughter home from that party. And he's got some really dramatic lines that he's got to read. As for when he tells her that her punishment for lying to him is that her punishment is to be herself and to have to live with herself. It's just fantastic, I think, the way he goes from person to person, from character to character within the film, and he's completely believable with each and every one, and yet there's a little nods here and there. Like in the deathbed scene, when they have this wonderfully emotional bit, and then he tells the girl, they pretty much, excuse me, I've got another appointment to get to. And she's like, yeah, it was great to meet you. You were great. And then they kind of move on. But I really found the joy was sort of in discovering the performance, as it evolved.
I mean, a lot of times people were saying like it doesn't make any sense, but it actually, to me, it made perfect sense. He's an actor. He's going from, appointment to appointment, doing this different roles, and he's performing for an unseen audience. The cameras are invisible. They even say that in the film. So I didn't find it I found like I did understand it. So I didn't. I'm sure you can try to interpret other things, but that's kind of how I took it. So that's not the problem I had with it. Wasn't that it didn't make any sense, and honestly that doesn't bother me anyway. But that the stories weren't interesting. I mean, the most interesting one was the one where he was that like satyr, and he or a leprechaun or whatever you want to call him, and he captures Eva Mendes at the cemetery and takes her back to his like lair in the catacombs. That's the most interesting story, and everything leading up to the part where he takes her down to the lair is kind of interesting. Where is this going? And that just has no point. That one just, it ends horribly. It's like, okay, this is just, they're just trying to shock you, and it's over. And then it's on to the next story, and then I'm sort of interested, and then it was just a successions of, like, I'm interested, and then pulling the rug and saying, no, there's nothing here. It's just, we're just going to shock you and then move on. And in this one, we're just going to, I don't know. I was disappointed. I was interested throughout the whole film, but by the end, I was thinking about it and felt like there just wasn't anything there. The ending is just, and it's bizarre. It's definitely, I guess I kind of actually sort of like the ending because I was like, oh, okay, some humor. But, it just didn't.
The ending's fantastic.
Yeah.
When with the limousines having the conversation. Oh.
Right.
And what I love, too, is that the limousines, they have the exact same concerns that the people have, the passage of time, whether or not they'll still be considered useful. I thought it was incredibly sweet.
I will say that I like the idea of describing him as a leprechaun in that one scenario with Eva Mendes. That's better than like weird vagrant guy that eats flowers and whatever else he can get his teeth onto. But here's a question I have. Were people one, I guess, how full was your guys' theaters when you saw the movie, and were people laughing during various parts of the movie?
I first saw it at the New York Film Festival at Lincoln Center, so it was sold out. Mm-hmm. Audience of festival goers. So, you could sort of, like, the energy was palpable. And then I saw it again, also at Lincoln Center, and the director was there for a Q&A afterwards. So it was another sort of biased scenario wherein people were there.
See, that's so much better. Yeah.
Particular interest in, this type of film. So I can't really speak to what it was like seeing it with a, quote, average audience. Not that maybe this film would ever be seen with an average audience, but, yeah.
Yeah, I saw the movie at AFI Fest at the Egyptian in LA, and it was kind of like your theater, Maxwell. It was pretty packed. And it actually started about 90 minutes late. They were having technical difficulties, and people stuck around, and, I thought it was incredibly worth it.
I saw it in a very tiny theater. There were 5 people in the whole theater watching it. So it was almost like I was watching it alone. There was like 5 or 6 people. The guy actually that sold me the ticket, he even said something like, "Are you ready to see this movie?" I don't know.
I like that he grabbed both your hands and looked you straight in the eye and said that.
He was the guy who sold me the ticket. It's kind of a small theater, and it's in Palo Alto, so it's often run by the Stanford students. So they're really, he obviously loved it. So he was like, he was talking to me about it before it started, like, oh, it's so, it's totally bizarre, and you're gonna love it. So, he was into it, but the rest of the crowd was not. I couldn't. There was no discernible, laughter or anything really throughout the film.
Yes, I saw it in an art house theater because obviously the theater it was playing next to Wreck-It Ralph and was sold out. So I went to the art house theater, and there's like about 8 people in there total by the time it was all said and done, and there were people kind of laughing at various parts of the film, and so I was curious because I wasn't necessarily surprised at laughter, but I was kind of like, oh, people are really into the mood of the film for certain scenes, especially like the mocap scene was one of them. The leprechaun sequence garnered some laughs and some other kind of various sequences throughout. So I was just curious what everyone else's kind of mood was like.
The leprechaun sequence is interesting because the leprechaun character is named Monsieur Merde, which is Mr.
Right.
And
French,
he
yeah.
also appeared in the movie Tokyo. I don't know if you guys saw that.
It's of the same director, right?
It's like the word escapes me, but it's 3 segments by 3 different tracks. Triptych, but yeah, that works fine. It's a triptych film. So Leos Carax did one, Michel Gondry did one, and then
Bong Joon-ho did one?
Yeah, the dude who did The Host, right?
I like him.
Yeah, so I mean that's a really interesting film. So to see that character come back kind of took me by surprise.
Put that movie on my queue.
What I love too is like, for one thing, the film is actually not afraid of the male erection, which is one thing that most cinema is terrified of.
I believe the film is unrated as well.
It's fascinating because, I mean, it's much more prevalent to see female for full frontal nudity than it is to see any kind of male nudity. And so I thought that was neat that the film actually kind of went in a different direction. And I think what's really fascinating too is for being such a strange, obviously somewhat sexual creature, he makes Eva Mendes a burqa.
Yeah, yes.
That was awesome.
To kind of jump back a little bit to what Mark was saying in terms of, quote, understanding the movie, I do agree that, taken literally, it is relatively straightforward. There's a clear path from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. He's obviously an actor for hire playing these different roles. There's invisible cameras. But what I think is interesting is looking at what happens in the individual segments sort of abstracted from the bigger picture. And that's what I found really fascinating. And the way, they would pay homage or reverence to, other things from classic cinema.
Right.
And I guess obviously the line between you guys is Mark just didn't find those that interesting, correct?
Right.
Okay. Right, Mark?
Yeah, I just wasn't captivated by it.
Yeah, okay. And for me, I guess, where I'm coming down on is I can't say I wasn't interested in it. I just, coming away from it, I'm just saying, it's not something that I guess I feel I need to revisit at any time. I feel I'm just, like, satisfied that I've seen this movie, but it doesn't fall in line with something that I like to see in general in terms of kind of other, I guess, films. Like, for me, like, this fell in line with movies like, with movies by, like, David Lynch. Like, David Lynch is a person I certainly appreciate as a filmmaker and admire kind of how he's taken an unconventional approach to making his films, but they're just not movies I tend to enjoy very much. And
see, and I love David Lynch.
There you go.
I'm wondering if, Adam
Yeah.
does it well.
I adore Mulholland Drive.
I do too, actually. I
That is
love
that's
David
my
Lynch.
Lynch movie of choice.
And I love Mulholland Drive. I love Lost Highway. I love
Ironically enough,
Eraserhead.
Drive is a movie that I think makes a lot of sense too. Much as I think this one, a lot of people say it doesn't make sense. Where I think if you look at it a certain way, I think it makes perfect sense.
And
Yeah,
I'll name 2 other directors, Luis Buñuel and Federico Fellini. Those 2 also have done films like this. I like things that they've done as well. I don't think that what Leo Carax does in here has as much of a point. It didn't have the wit or the I don't know. It just didn't have those things that those other directors do have for me.
here's a question to Adam and Maxwell then. Do you think there's kind of maybe a unifying theme or something that you would say kind of puts this film together as a whole that you would walk away and describe it as or give meaning to?
Yes. Ignoring everything about, how it's a comment on cinema and all of that, the theme that I found that ran throughout the film was kind of, in some ways, actually similar to The Artist last year, and that is sort of being an old hat in the face of new technology or new ideas.
I would say that the particular theme that I felt ran through the piece was the tragedy of performance. It's the actor that is never truly off stage, and you get the sense that he never is able to take a break or to be his own genuine self because he's constantly having to perform for other people, almost like a modern version of gladiatorial combat, almost. It's people are watching this for their amusement, and yet he's having to give and to give and to give. What is he really getting out of it?
All right. Now, okay, another question I have. I guess in terms of what you guys think, in terms of what this person's doing throughout the day, and given kind of the things he's supposed to go through, would you say that there is like a fantasy element that accompanies this movie, or would you take it up as a kind of a straightforward, well, not straightforward, but like a drama?
Fantastical. I mean, there are limousines that talk to each other.
Well, yeah, I guess so.
But I mean, it's kind of basically that limo is clearly has the balm of Gilead inside because
it's a bag of holding. Yes,
he dies a million times, and yet he's constantly, being restored to full health after some pretty gruesome deaths, even. So yeah, it's certainly got some fantastical elements. Yeah.
Yeah, remember it starts out, it's been a while, but it starts out with the director, I think, waking up and then seeing an audience, and he goes through the wallpaper, and I mean, that was all kind of interesting.
That cool thing coming out of his fingers, like the key, and...
Yeah, I liked all that. In fact, that was very David Lynch to me, and I started, thinking, okay, this is really kind of cool, and I did like, there was sort of a fantasy element there, too, and then he ends up at the house, and they get in the limo, and so I mean, yeah, there's some I definitely is fantasy.
What's yeah, okay.
And there's chimpanzees, and
I'm really just reassuring this to myself that I didn't just imagine certain things, I guess. But go Maxwell. What?
The interesting thing about the guy in the beginning is that it is the director Leos Carax playing that part, which adds this whole other sort of metatextual element to it. Like he is opening you up to his, twisted little experiment. It's
so, to me, how I'm kind of, as I reflect on this film more, especially now that we're having a good conversation about it, I do kind of admire the film more when I think about it in pieces as opposed to a whole, because there are segments that I really do enjoy, even the ones that are kind of nonsensical or just mean kind of nothing, like the intermission involving just Mr. Oscar and a bunch of men playing accordions.
Accordions, yeah.
That
was good.
I really love that.
It's almost like that U2 song Vertigo,
Okay,
when he counts in 1, 2, 3, 14 in Spanish, when he goes 3, 12 in French.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
That accordion scene, taken out of context, is my single favorite scene from any movie this year.
Nice. Okay.
I find it to be like pure joy, that short little scene. I've watched that. There's a clip of it on YouTube that I've watched more times than I would be comfortable admitting to you all fine people tonight.
Like I'll put that in the show notes as well, and I'll probably watch it myself a couple times before I go to sleep tonight. But yeah, it is sort of a scene that I'm like at that point in the movie, you're halfway through the movie, so you're like, either you're with it or you're not, and I'm just kind of sitting there like, this is neat. I like where this.
There's accordions, and I would let you all know that when I was introduced, I was labeled as the accordion player by Aaron. Some fact that I take no small amount of pleasure from. Nice. Thank you very much, good sir.
Sure thing. I'm always happy to write the intros here, so it's good to hear some feedback. The other scene, the mocap, the mocap performer sequence, that's another scene that I kind of like. I was like into in a sort of. It had almost like if Kubrick was still alive, that almost seems like a scene that he could have shot in a way. Just in sort of the straightforward way it's presented versus kind of the outlandish nature of what's going on.
I mean,
I think he should have used a body double, because if he didn't use a body double, then Mr. Levant deserves a lot of credit, because that's a very athletic scene.
I'd like to believe the myth that he did perform that scene and would be happy to accept the fact that he's just that talented.
I laughed so much at that scene, and this is kind of an aside, but I was in, down in Union Square, New York City, and these two guys walked by dressed in motion capture suits. I had to do a double take. I was like, so have I gone crazy? Have I seen so many movies that now I'm seeing things? But then they handed me a flyer for Holy Motors, and I was like, oh, okay.
Okay.
And it's just so wonderfully exaggerated too with the sex between the characters, and it's very interesting. And then you see the characters that they're playing, and it's so outlandish.
Now, how about the sequence involving Kylie Minogue?
Oh, it's kind of heartbreaking and beautiful. I was very impressed by her, and the song is a lovely song.
And that's kind of the musical segment of the...
I remember seeing the trailer, and it said, Dennis Levant, and you're like, okay, great, and then it says Kylie Minogue, and you think to yourself, huh? And then it's like, Eva Mendes, and it seems like a very odd pairing, but, I mean, I thought that's a really lovely segment, too, just because you get the sense, even though it ends up being a performance, you get the sense that there are these two people that have really loved each other outside of the context of their work for this agency, and they're reuniting, and they have a child or whatever, and it's lovely.
It's almost a practical joke, though, on anybody who is like a Kylie Minogue fan and her pop singing and thinking, oh, I'm going to go see this movie with her in it, and then finding this. I mean, it's not, like, expected, for sure.
What other sequence? Oh, there's the spy sequence as well, which has some of the darkest humor. Well, actually, I don't know. Kylie Minogue jumping off buildings kind of darkly funny. But...
That's it all right.
I halfway expected her to, on the way down, turn into her green fairy character from Moulin Rouge and just fly away. I mean, at that point, I was like, anything is possible in this movie, so... Which is kind of exciting to watch something and feel like there really are no rules.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Anything can happen. I found it kind of liberating.
Particularly with American cinema, there's just such there's almost this fear of doing anything outside the box. And it's, like you said, it's nice to see a film in which anything could conceivably happen. And so you really have to pay attention and whatnot. And there's that, I'm told too that the scene with the gangsters is based on a music video called Rabbit in Your Headlights, which unfortunately I have not seen, but I love that shot where he kills the guy who he's altered to look like himself, and they lay there, and it's just identical. It was hilarious.
Trying to think of anything else we want to bring. Is there anything else you want to bring up involving Holy Motors? Any of it?
I think the response to it has been really fascinating. Like, a lot of people have really lobbied behind the film and like named it their favorite of the year. Like, it's inspired passion that I don't often see amongst fellow film lovers and or critics, which at the end of the day doesn't have much worth to it, but I think it's always interesting to see which films certain people decide to rally behind, and what they make of it. And this one, because there is so many different elements to read their analyses and why they connect to it, has been sort of an interesting compliment to the film itself, more so than a lot of other criticism I've read throughout the past year.
I'd just like to state for the record that the license plate of the limo reads 202 DVM95.
Okay.
But I have no idea what that means.
It's the end date for the world. You just have to kind of move the
bias.
It's actually a clue to Lost.
Arriving just in time.
Have you guys seen Cosmopolis?
I've not seen Cosmopolis yet.
No, this is the same thing, right? A guy in a limo.
Right, which is something I think is interesting to kind of look at those two pieces next to each other, wherein the construct is one short period of time with a guy traveling in a limousine while strange things occur around them.
Which of the two do you prefer, Maxwell?
Holy Motors, no question. I didn't like Cosmopolis that much.
Which one has more erections?
I mean, it depends on if you're talking about in the movie or Robert Pattinson is certainly more attractive than Dennis Levant.
Even as the Leprechaun character?
I don't know. I mean, I really liked him in the motion capture suit. Got to see all of his curves.
And this is obviously signaling the end of our discussion about Holy Motors, so I'm going to wrap this one up with our rating. On Out Now Fahrenheit, we always give a rating based on when you should go and see this film. And even though Holy Motors is a limited release, I'm going to hold the same rating scale up. I'm going to say IMAX, Theater, Dollar Theater, HBO, Netflix. I said that backwards. or just kind of forget about it. So, on that scale, how did I start? Adam Gentry, where would you put Holy Motors on that scale?
A very strong theater.
Mark Hoban?
Netflix.
Maxwell?
I mean, if you could find an IMAX theater playing it, by all means, go.
And yeah, I guess I'd give it a Netflix as well, just because I want people to kind of see it. It's just not that movie for me.